de Mayor. I thought I'd give just a brief background to how this piece came about. So Pablo Mayor, right here to my right, the composer and pianist involved in this project, we were approached to get involved in the Legend Bicentennial Cultural Celebration last year, around the same time of the deadline for the ArtsAlive grant cycle at ArtsWestchester. And the idea was to connect the kind of work we do with Latin American music and dance, which focuses on European, African, and indigenous roots, with the spirit of Washington Irving, who in his time embraced other cultures. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Washington Irving other than the author of the Tale of the Headless Horseman. But he lived in Spain for a while. He wrote Tales of the Alhambra and is responsible for bringing Spanish architecture to the New World, to the tradition of Santa Claus, among many other things. So he was a person that really embraced other cultures. So we decided, in connecting with this celebration of Washington Irving, and instead of just connecting with the Headless Horseman, we thought we'd connect with his spirit of one that embraces the kind of community we have now in Sleepy Hollow. So we decided to write our own tale of Sleepy Hollow in light of the current folklore of the region, representing a significant population of Latin American residents, as well as a large Portuguese community. Unspoken Tales will tell stories of 5 anonymous people who have shared their stories with Pablo and I over the last several months. Not all the details are absolutely exact, and I want to say forgive me for any errors in my note-taking, but the larger, most important points that we gather from these interviews are all true. And I have just basically summed up these interviews in the narration that I will read. The process of creating music and dance and connected with stories is not an exact science. The work of Daniel Fetecua, I should say right over here to my left, our choreographer and dancer. Both Pablo and Daniel are from Colombia, by the way. Anyway, the work of Daniel and Pablo is objective, but we would like to give context to the artistic work by sharing the stories and then bringing the music and dance as we go tonight. Some of the connections might be obvious, some not so obvious, but it was Pablo's and Danielle's hope that their work might express some of the human qualities that connect each of these stories and ultimately us all. Thank you. I grew up with 7 brothers and sisters in a town called Hima, Ecuador. My family didn't have phones. It was a simple farm with animals and some farmland. We lived together, all 8 children with my parents and grandparents. My family did not have money to get their farm off the ground, nor the organizational knowledge on how to plant, how to convert their farm into something productive. My sister had a baby at the age of 15. I witnessed my parents reprimanding my sister, but in truth, there was no education to help prevent these things from happening. Education in general was very limited in my town. Where I come from, it was the norm to socialize and drink on the weekends with no thought for the future. I needed out of my crowded house and to focus on my life. At the age of 15, I left my parents and family and home for the city of Cuenca. Leaving seemed the only possibility for work and some sense of future. I lived and worked for a woman who insisted that I study, but being 15 years old already, I was too old for the general school available. So I worked cleaning and cooking for this woman in Cuenca all day and attended school at night. It was here in Cuenca that I met my future husband. He had a family member already in Sleepy Hollow and made the decision to leave. We had fallen in love, and when he left me, we made a promise to be together, no matter what. I was 18, a year after my now husband left for Sleepy Hollow, when the opportunity came for me to leave to the United States I had not yet finished my high school studies, but with everything in place, I had to seize the moment to join him. Like many that leave Ecuador without hope and without documents, I got a loan using my family's land as the promissory note. $10,000 for the coyote, $5,000 prior to the journey, and $5,000 upon my arrival. I did it for love. I grew up in the countryside in a city called Moca, capital of the Espaillat province, in the area known as Juan Lopes in the Dominican Republic, in an agricultural area of coffee, avocado, plantain, yucca, these sorts of things. My grandmother on my father's side had left for Sleepy Hollow years before and eventually petitioned for my father to come to Tarrytown. My father took my two older brothers and eventually returned to the Dominican Republic. My brothers stayed behind to work, and next came me. My mother and father wanted me to leave. They wanted me to go to school, to get an education. I did not really want to leave my country, but I knew it was necessary for my future. I grew up in the countryside of Ecuador. If you didn't come from money, there was just no hope for a future. We lived simply, but without the resources to buy and invest in land. Education was very limited. There was no money, no work, no future. I was married and with a baby, and we wanted only for our son to have a better future. My husband and family had family in Sleepy Hollow, and we decided that he would leave ahead of me and I would follow. Each of our journeys required loans of nearly $15,000 to pay the people who would arrange for our entry into the United States. With no choice, we did what we had to do. I grew up in Santo Domingo with my brother, raised by my mother since my father was not present except a year on special holidays. I felt that everything I needed growing up. School, presents at Christmas, food, nothing really lacking as a child. My father had 8 children from 4 different women. His mother, my grandmother, went to New York and petitioned my father. My father left the Dominican Republic and established himself in Sleepy Hollow and subsequently petitioned for each of his children to come. I grew up on a farm in the northern end of Portugal, about 20 minutes from the coast. I was the youngest of 5 brothers and sisters. My father was a farmer. My family had animals, grew rice, vegetables, among other things. And from the age of 7, I had the job of feeding the cows. Despite life in the countryside, I was always fascinated with American films and everything about the American culture. I went to school from the age of 7 until I was 11 years old. My future was carved out for me to continue work on my father's farm, but at the age of 12, I had my mind set on something more. I left the farm to go work for my uncle, who I remember once scolding me, telling me that I had everything, work, my family's farm. Why would I possibly want to leave? But my heart was not there. My journey from Cuenca began with a flight to Mexico City, where I was taken to a hotel with 7 other people, later by car to another house. While waiting for the opportunity to cross the border, the Mexican immigration authorities came to the house and arrested us all. And we were put on a plane back to Ecuador. I arrived back in Ecuador and made another attempt to cross by land through Colombia. But at the border, after the authorities saw the other attempts I had made, I was put in a small jail in Tulcan. There I met a woman in the business whose mother was working with a lawyer to get her out. We were both transferred to a bigger jail where we were told that there would be more security and we would have to remove all our clothes and items. I had $5,000 hidden in pantyhose tied around my waist, which I was frightened to lose if discovered. So I decided to trust the mother of my new friend to take my money. It was a hard thing giving away my only money to survive on and the money that was borrowed to a stranger, but I didn't have any other choice. I was 3 weeks in jail in very hot conditions. I'm from the mountains where it's cool most of the year, and here the heat was unbearable, like nothing I was accustomed to. I was released from jail, and when I got out, I didn't have a cent on me, and I was dropped on the street in an unfamiliar town. I didn't even have money to make a phone call. The only thing I could think was to call the woman who was holding my money. She told me to go to a hotel, and there she picked me up and drove me back to Cuenca. To my surprise, she returned my $5,000 in its entirety, still wrapped in the pantyhose. I was able to regroup and meet again with the coyote who had promised to get me to the United States. The coyote told me she had bad luck with me and had already lost money on this trip. And she connected me with someone else and miraculously returned my money in full. I was told that my last choice was to go by sea. So the next step on my journey was to leave on a cargo ship from the port city of Esmeraldas. In order to get there, I had to walk 4 hours through the jungle. And in the late evening, I remember arriving to a steep cliff with a group of mostly women, and we were told to go down in order to reach the shore. It was dark and it was very steep. We were so frightened to go down the steep embankment in the complete darkness, so the people had to push us one by one. I remember that I landed on the sand, and there we boarded a raft, which took us out to the cargo ship. There were about 80 people in my group. Once on board the ship, we sailed 8 days to Guatemala, arriving on a Sunday when there were guards along the shore and we were forced to continue sailing in circles for 2 days. I remember that we all arrived dizzy and seasick to Guatemala, to then walk 8 hours through the mountains, to arrive at a house where we would stay and wait for the coyote week after week. My luck ran out here as the coyote I had paid never showed up and lied to my sister in Cuenca that I had made it and demanded the remaining $5,000, which I unknowingly lost. Fortunately, another man approached our group and offered to help, and so my journey continued. I didn't have money to offer him, but he assured me that we would resolve the finances later. This young man walked us 8 hours to arrive at another house where we boarded a raft, which took us on a long journey along a river. It was a makeshift raft and a big river, and we arrived soaking wet. I remember walking an hour to a hacienda. We arrived at 8 p.m. and were then taken by car to Mexico City, then to Chihuahua, where we were to wait for the coyote to guide us along the secret tunnel where we would cross into the United States finally. But my bad luck continued, and the Mexican immigration authorities arrived at the door of the house and arrested us all, taking us to Mexico City, where we were held and questioned for nearly 3 weeks. This time pretending to be Guatemalans, we were taken by bus to the border of Guatemala and Mexico. At this point, I had nothing, no money, no documents, no identification. It was just my word, and we managed to convince the authorities so we wouldn't get sent all the way back to Ecuador. Here at the border, the young coyote again, who had promised to help, showed up, and he gave me a choice: El Paso or El Rio Grande. I boarded a bus from Veracruz in the luggage compartments underneath the bus. Despite time in jail, walking through jungle, floating on rafts down the river, for the first time I felt fear. My mind had been so focused, so clearly set on my destination and future that I didn't allow myself to think. But here, underneath a bus, in this dark, claustrophobic compartment, I remember so vividly the sounds of one of the only men in the group, hysterically crying and calling out, "Ay, señor, ayúdame, sácame, madre mía!" We women, we endured the 6 hours in complete silence. But this man, he brought fear into me for the first time. We finally arrived to a house in Reynosa, where we were each given a gallon of water, a can of beans, a can of tuna, a can of corn, and sent wading across the Rio Grande. Water up to our chests in complete darkness. We arrived to a cemetery where we were told to hide through the night until we were picked up by the next person and taken to Brownsville. We stayed at a house in Brownsville for 3 days and nights, and then crossed the desert, walking 3 straight days and nights to Houston. I was fortunate, but a family member of mine saw people die along this part of the journey on a separate occasion, and she was pregnant at the time. In Houston, I was taken to a house with nearly 200 other people waiting to provide final payments to coyotes before being able to finally leave for Sleepy Hollow. I did it all for love. I was 16 years old. I was 16 years old in my last year of high school in Santo Domingo, when my father petitioned for me to come with my brother. Leaving my mother was difficult, especially knowing that I was going to live with a father who I barely knew. When I decided to make the trip to join my husband, I was told I couldn't travel with my child due to the documents that were being arranged for me. I found a woman for whom I had worked who traveled frequently between the United States and Ecuador and offered to bring my son. He was 2 years old at the time. I was forced to make the difficult decision to leave my child and fly to join my husband while arrangements were made for our son. We left him with family who had to train him for many months on what to say and how to call the woman who would carry him through immigration in case anyone asked. We waited 9 months for the process of preparing the trip for our son. It was a painful and extremely difficult time for me as a mother. I was 15 when I had to say goodbye to my mother, my father, my homeland. For me, it was not easy. The sadness I felt as I boarded the plane to this foreign land was overwhelming. At the age of 15, I emigrated from Portugal to Brazil, to Rio with my uncle, where my older sister and brother were already living and working. The trip was 10 days on a ship. It was 1954, and I left behind my mother and father, who I would only communicate with by letter for the next 7 years. At the time, there was no phone, and I did not have the means to travel. Upon arrival, I was immediately given work in the family bread-making business. I was given a route and on a bike with a basket and was to deliver bread along the route. After 2 months, I was so efficient that I doubled the number of clients and had to add another basket to the bike to accommodate the extra loaves. I worked hard, and eventually I had my own grocery store and a butcher shop, and was able to buy my first house within the 7 years I lived in Brazil. I met my wife during this time, a blonde-haired, green-eyed woman who biked by one day and stuck out her tongue at me, and I the same back at her. We had a very formal courtship. At the time, romance was very formal. I had to ask permission from her parents to marry her and visit her only at their house. We wanted to marry, but I didn't have the money and told her she had to wait 5 years. We finally decided to marry in March of 1963. We traveled by boat to Portugal for our honeymoon. I remember the storms on the ships and how it was a frightening journey in those days. And it was the first time I had been to Portugal in 7 years. And we spent 7 months traveling around the country. And upon returning to Brazil, Rio was in the midst of a political upheaval. The military took control of the government, and I remember seeing dead bodies all alongside the road. Portugal was in a similar predicament with Salazar ruling the country and Mussolini and Franco looming elsewhere in Europe. It was a terrible time, and I knew I had to leave the country and knew I needed to go to the United States. I had a Portuguese friend from my hometown who sponsored us, living in Sleepy Hollow. I prepared by studying English at a school in Rio, and since my wife was Brazilian and the political situation the way it was, I was granted an automatic green card. Everything was set up prior to our journey at the embassy in Rio. And in December, 9 months after returning from our honeymoon, our first child was born in Rio. And shortly after, we journeyed to America with our new baby by ship. My flight to New York was a smooth one, and I was fortunate to not have suffered as so many of the people from my land have suffered in journeying to the United States. My husband was waiting for me and had already connected me with a factory where I would work. 9 months after my arrival, my son was put on a plane with the woman we had paid to bring him. When they crossed through immigration upon arrival to New York, my son was asleep and he arrived safely. Words cannot describe what it was to reunite with my child when he arrived in New York after all the waiting. It was an emotional moment for me and for my husband. I gave birth to another son a few years later in Sleepy Hollow, and I'm so grateful they were able to receive an education. My husband and I have worked from the moment of our arrival to save for our children and to pay the debts of what it took to bring us here. I miss my country, and in order to have the opportunity for a future for my family, I have to this day not had the opportunity to go back. Years after being in the United States, I was talking on the phone to my family one day and was told that my father choked to death. He died before I was ever able to see him again. When I arrived in Tarrytown, it was already cool, September as I recall. I moved into an apartment with my 2 older brothers, and from the time I arrived, I worked like an animal. I know it was my mother's wish that I be educated, but I couldn't ask my parents for money to live, even though I was only 15 years old. I had to support myself, and all I knew was I needed to work. I started washing dishes in a well-known restaurant. I worked until sometimes 4 a.m. on the weekends, and then I couldn't wake up for school. And then I got multiple other jobs to support myself. It was too much for me, the school during the day and trying to work. After 3 months, I dropped out of school altogether. I remember that first winter in particular, the extreme cold outside and the overwhelming heat inside that caused my skin to crack. It was painful, and I missed so much my mother. I arrived at Sleepy Hollow to find my beloved and a job waiting for me after my long journey, which I began 3 days after arriving. It was a job at a factory, packing paper towelettes for $4.50, 15 cents an hour. From the minute I arrived, every penny went to pay my debts to the Coyotes, which added up to nearly $700 a month, all of which was sent back to Ecuador. But we had work, and we had children and built a family. I didn't see my parents for 19 years when my mother was finally able to make the trip. I remember her arrival at the airport. I hardly recognized my mother. She had aged so much, and she was in such bad health. After spending 3 months with us, my mother went back to Ecuador, where she died shortly after. I moved into my father's apartment with 2 other young children from his other marriage who he had already brought to Sleepy Hollow. They were 8 and 10 years old. I ended up having to cook for the whole family. Something I just learned because I had to do it. I knew I was there for my future, and I quickly learned to deal with each new challenge as it was presented to me. I didn't know English when I arrived in the United States and was placed in 10th grade, which in terms of the Dominican school system was 2 years behind where I should have been. I was good in school, but did not pick up English so quickly. I didn't feel that the environment was conducive for learning English until my final year of high school. I was surrounded by other Hispanic students and was hearing Spanish spoken all around me. I also didn't understand the traditions of the new culture in the United States and did not participate in prom or similar activities at school out of just not really understanding what things were all about. I also wasn't able to see my mother for a period of 2 years. My childhood in many ways was interrupted and my life upended when I arrived to Sleepy Hollow. Upon arriving in Sleepy Hollow, I started landscaping. My second daughter was born after moving to Sleepy Hollow. I recall my boss didn't read or write, and despite having to work in a job below what I was capable of doing, I was happy to work. After 1 year, I left for GM, where I worked initially painting cars. I would work overtime until 2 or 3 a.m., Fridays until late. I worked. I learned all different jobs and would cover for people who wouldn't come into work. And while working, I also took a course on landscaping at night at the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx. I had already known so much about pruning from my father growing up on the farm in Portugal. So it was easy for me to get more involved in the business. I eventually printed my own business card with my name and went to all the wealthy neighborhoods, which were Scarsdale and Harrison at the time, and presented my card. I was such a good worker and honest, and through word of mouth, I started getting calls to do landscaping, and eventually I was doing not one house, but every house on the block. I built my own business little by little, bought machines. I eventually pursued bigger contracts, seeding and planting trees for parkways, from Westchester to Albany, city and state projects for the Department of Transportation, including in New York City parks. I secured contracts to plant 1,500 to 2,000 trees a year, a business which I held for 48 years. My projects include the trees in Battery Park near the ferry landing for the Statue of Liberty, among others. I attribute the longevity of my company to my honesty, dedication, and fair treatment of my workers all these years. After establishing myself in my job, I was finally able to return to the Dominican Republic after the first 9 months. I missed so much my homeland, and during the several months I was back, I tried everything to see what I could do to stay and make a living back home. I tried the chicken business, which my father had been into, but nothing got off the ground. During those 5 months of being at home, I made a formal promise to my girlfriend at the time, who was 15 years old, who had always lived 4 houses down from ours. She moved into my parents' house with the promise of becoming my future wife. I continued my trips back and forth between New York and the Dominican Republic, each time trying my best to make something work back at home, and each time failing. Once I even took a course on haircutting, but I just could not find a way to survive there. It was not easy. I continued working in Tarrytown, holding multiple jobs at once, at Walgreens, Tappan Hill, later the Tarrytown house, and eventually drove a taxi. I bought a car and sold it. I eventually brought my wife. She got pregnant with our daughter within the first 4 months. My heart has always been in the Dominican Republic, but I am so grateful to be able to support my family, my wife and daughter, and to educate my daughter in good schools. I hope to own my own house someday, and I keep working. I have been in Sleepy Hollow for 22 years now. My daughter's now 18 and studying science in college, and my younger children are happily studying in the public schools. I'm still with my husband, and I'm thankful for the present and for opportunities I've had to educate my children and to build a future for them. I have been in Sleepy Hollow now 20 years. My life recently has come with a new anxiety of not knowing what will happen to my children, to my family, if we are sent back to Ecuador. My 2 sons have been treated for depression and anxiety out of fear that we might be sent back, and out of fear that they will find themselves back in a country that is foreign to them. I thank God every day that I have had work to enable me to educate my two sons. They are now both in university, one in his third year of medical school and one in his first year of college. I continue to work and pray for the well-being of my family. I eventually graduated and went on to study business administration in college. I also was able to petition for my mother to come here, and she now lives close by in Sleepy Hollow. I now work at a bank and have the desire to help this Hispanic community. I know what it was like to come here, and I would like to help other people who struggle in assimilating to the culture and in finding their way. I have found obstacles to being a Latina, and as my husband says, we as Latinos have always had to work double in order to gain the attention and respect of people in the workplace. My husband and I recently purchased our own home in Sleepy Hollow, and I work so that my new baby and my older son can have the opportunities that I had for education and a future. Behind my drive and ambition was always the need to provide for my wife and two daughters. Although you can say that I was ambitious from the time I was very young, I guess it was in my blood. My wife was always at my side. She traveled everywhere with me on business trips. We were always together. I still had the electric chair in the entrance to my house, which carried her up the stairs in the final moments of her life when she couldn't walk up to the stairs anymore. She died in 2013, and I still miss her. I adored my wife, but I continue to live with the positive attitude that has brought about happiness and success in my life. Being positive and having faith has been everything for me. You cannot think that things won't happen or will go wrong. Every day you have to wake up and be positive about things in your life. I thank God each day for everything He has given me. You have to be thankful. Before we show you the piece, which this is not yet the piece, sorry, this is just leading up to the piece, this part of the piece. I'd like to invite Pablo and Daniel to speak about hearing the stories and how it impacted what they did to create the musical and dance piece that you're about to see.
Thank you so much for being here. I don't have much to say. There are three pieces. One focus on the indigenous, and I was wondering how I could portray. There is a common thread to this. It's like everyone who want that change is hopeful. So I want to portray struggle, but I want to portray also the positive thinking, the focus, all that energy that is necessary for somebody who just live. And I was very much thinking about what you feel when you walk or when you struggle, but there is one element that I found that helped me a lot. It was the element of faith, when you realize that you're gonna have to trust somebody you don't know, or the creator, or both. So that is the first piece. Then I was inspired by a story of love, and that was it. Everything is based on feelings, on trying to feel what these people are going through, what comes to them, and relating with it. Daniel.
Maybe I should ask the question.
Ask the question.
Okay.
So before Anna asks questions, we this project we have been talking about it for a long time, and I have been having it in my mind. And once I read the tales, and then I was moved in many ways. Once by each person who was able, who shared their memories and their stories, and also how I connect with those stories in different ways. Being an immigrant, traveling, pursuing my dreams, love, and then we work with the dancers, and I choose 3 of the tales. One of the Ecuadorian, the Portuguese person, and the Dominican Republic. But each creation of each solo was different, because as you see, there are 3 human beings standing up here, and we have a voice also. So, for instance, talking to Willy, who is from the Dominican Republic, actually, and he has a story that is very close by. The other guy that was the other person who shared with us. So we put ourselves into the piece as well in terms of what we want to share with you guys tonight in the creations, in the choreography. And I have to admit, it was hard for me to do this piece because nothing was coming into my head to create. And also I have to choose the dancers that I wanted, that I think they were right on for this project. So I met with Pablo, and then he showed me the music, and he said, we have been working with Pablo for more than 10 years. And we have done many projects together, improvising and doing things. But he just showed me the music and said, I have this story, this idea, this is the political moment, this is the military moment, this is the love moment. And he started to, with his voice and his music, start to open my mind in a way that I could start seeing things in my mind and say, oh, we can do this, we can do that. I can start creating. And then after I talked to him, Courtney appeared in another project. We wanted to, we meet. And then I thought of Willy right away because we're working on different projects too. And I think it was perfect to do it. But actually, we didn't know it was going to be available at some point for this day, but it came available. So we work and work and work and work and do the pieces here. So that's my side.
I think Pablo talked a lot about feelings, but I think it's also important to talk about the fact that he was inspired by, that he used traditional rhythms and musical styles from the different countries. The first piece, he mentioned indigenous, but that for him really is Ecuador, which has a very strong indigenous culture. I don't know if you want to talk about the rhythm and then the Portuguese.
Well, listen to the music from Cuenca. Once in a long time ago, Colombia used to be a big country. It was Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Venezuela. So I relate with the music from there, and that was the inspiration, some music that I heard from Cuenca. The music from Dominican Republic, I based it on a rhythm called merengue, which was popular for many years, and I listen to a lot of fado music, and I love Portuguese music, and it's so emotional and sentimental and romantic, and it was actually a pleasure just to be involved. The last thing I wanted to say is that the main goal that I wanted to portray in this music is the fact that it doesn't matter where you come from, we're all humans. And the feelings and the struggles and the love and the hopes are the same. It doesn't matter where you come from. So that's what I wanted to say.
We just do one quick. We're good? Okay, so here we go, Unspoken Tales.
year we will have a orchestra performing this piece. Any questions, anybody?
Yeah, we open this.
Public intends this for 12 musicians, so it's just